Welcome back to the Lion's Den. In this episode, we speak with Chat Joglekar, the CEO of Baton Market, which aims to do for small businesses what Zillow did for housing. Central marketplace with price transparency to simplify the highly stressful process of buying and selling businesses. This is a really fun conversation, and Chat is a very smart guy. So without further ado, please enjoy. Chat, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Thank you for having me on the Den.
Of course. So we're going to definitely talk a lot about your business, Baton. But before we do that, I was looking at your LinkedIn page. I messaged you about this yesterday. You've worked at Google, Spotify, Zillow, USA Today. It's like serious brand name recognition on there. Can you give us like just a little overview of how your career unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always come to the realization I like to work on things that haven't existed before or been done before. And if you unpack the parts of my career, they're often, at Google, starting the inside sales team at Google, which didn't exist before, at Zillow, launching the new construction marketplace, Spotify helping scale and launch the ads business, but also just a bunch of other countries. And so I think that's what I find I love, which is interesting now being a founder, because that's literally now 0 to 1. This might have been within the framework of a larger company. How can we take a big swing at something that we believe to be true, and then kind of figure out if we can make it work? And I've been lucky enough in my career to take some of those swings within larger companies and make them work. And now at Baton, trying to take the swing on kind of my own thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how old were you when you started Baton?
49.
Okay. That's you. So I was looking at some data on this. I feel like the common, everybody feels like founders are in their early 20s or something like that. But when you actually look at the data, it's actually more like 40, which is kind of interesting. And you're even on the higher end of that. So I guess the question is, if you could do it again, would you have gone out on your own sooner? Do you think everything worked out the way it should have? What's your thought process there?
Yeah. Knowing what I know now, I would have told my younger self to honestly even just found something in my 20s or certainly 30s to kind of get reps and just learn. That said, I think back to my last answer, the experience that I got at companies like Google and Zillow was instrumental in preparing me for this. So I do think, to the research, the folks that are 40 and start have the ability to pattern match. They have the ability to understand how something should work, and I think understand what good and what great is and what excellent is. What's excellence in a team, what's excellence in a go-to-market motion, what's excellence in kind of a product. So that's really where, if you can get enough of those experiences, you end up being really well prepared to be a founder.
Totally agree. And have you've heard of search funds, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I got my MBA, after I got my MBA, I tried to go the search fund route. And for people listening, that's when you basically raise money to support yourself for a year or two while you search for a business to buy, an existing business, and then you run that business as the CEO. So I did the, Boston, San Francisco, the classic search fund investor circuit. And I met with all those guys. And none of them invested in my search fund. And one of them was honest with me, and they were like, because I asked him why? And he said, look, you're 27 years old. We generally invest in searchers who are 32 years old or older. And that kind of annoyed me. But then when I turned 32, I was like, okay, this actually makes total sense. The amount of additional, like you said, best practices and all that stuff that I know now
Mm-hmm.
It would be foolish for them to invest in a 27-year-old. So I
Yeah.
get it. Um, so do you think that you've been able to, starting a business later in life, do you think you've been able to go, you mentioned 0 to 1, you know, have you been able to go from 0 to 1 or 0 to 2 or whatever a hell of a lot faster than you otherwise would have?
I think so. I mean, I'm probably talking my own book, so I'm the wrong person to talk to, but I do think we hear from either our existing investors and other folks that are saying that the scale and speed that we're operating at and getting to, the revenue levels that we're getting to is quicker than they see, because I do think if you can spend the time up front to really think through the strategy and how you're going to go to market and how you're going to craft the pricing and the packaging and the product, um, that saves you a bunch of cycles along the way. Obviously, we're learning along the way and tweaking and kind of improving, but
Mhm.
hopefully puts us at like Everest base camp 2, right? Versus way down the mountain. So it's still a lot of work, but you're kind of standing on shoulders, in a way. And I do think certainly at Baton, the ability to pattern match with some of the other companies that we've already talked about, real estate and small business acquisitions, and like what I saw at Zillow versus what we're doing at Baton, and then kind of high growth, fast growing, starting new teams at Google and at Zillow and at Spotify. Scaling up a team based on product market fit is something I've done a ton of times. I've built multiple $100 million businesses. And so this, now that we're doing that at Baton, isn't something that is out of bounds or is we were talking to a couple of investors, um, last week, and everything is a known where we know how to do it. We know what we need to do. And now it's just going and executing on it.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the other industries before Baton. So, and maybe just real quick, can you just give us what Baton does, so then I can start asking questions on it?
Yeah. So we're a marketplace for small business sellers and buyers. So a small business seller that's looking to retire or move on to their next thing can list on the platform and get matched with the right buyer and transact their business. So, for folks that are familiar in the space, there really is no reliable way for a small business seller or buyer to go do this. There's a few other marketplaces, but there's not a lot of trust and transparency built into them. So that's really how we're coming to market. And we offer free business valuations to any small business, which really, and we may talk about it in some of these other industries, but unlocks, on the supply side, the owner really understanding how much their business is worth.
Got it. Okay. And so, going back to what you were saying previously about how, you picked up certain things from Zillow, from Spotify, from all these different Google, these different companies you worked at, and you're bringing those to bear, at Baton. That makes sense to me. I guess what is still a little bit of a question mark is, the previous companies were news, tech, music. Then Zillow was sort of like, I was looking at your LinkedIn page, was kind of the start of like this real estate track in a way. You worked at Ribbon, which is financing for home buyers. Then Room, which I went to that website. It's actually super cool, little modular office space stuff. Sort of tangentially real estate, you could
Mm-hmm.
say. So you're on this sort of this doing a bunch of different industries, then a real estate track. How did the shift happen where you said, I want to start Baton and create a marketplace for business buyers and sellers?
Yeah, it was actually a friend that I was catching up with who was looking to buy a small business, which was a new thing for me. So,
Mhm.
kind of the 5 whys. I was asking him, why is he doing this? Why aren't you buying real estate? Again, to a hammer, every solution looks like a nail. I'm like, you should just do real estate. And he was talking through it, and he's like, hey, I think these generate a ton of cash flow. Again, it's like buying a rental property that is just throwing off guaranteed rental income type of thing. And he actually made the comment in the conversation that, he was like, talking to you reminds me that what's missing in this space is the Zillow for small business, because his challenge was owners didn't know what their business is worth, and so that becomes really hard for a buyer to even triangulate and go talk to them and be like, I'm going to offer you $1 million for your business, or in the price asymmetry kind of construct, you actually don't want to offer them a price until you kind of understand more about the financials and all the things. And after, I honestly, he said that, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, because I do think the pattern matching of, what if every small business in America knew how much they were worth, how many more of them could list and trade and get their value, because generally a small business either thinks they're worth 1/10 of what they're actually worth or 10x what they're worth, because they're not private equity, associates where they're thinking about EBITDA and SDE or cash flow and what's the multiple that it's trading on. And so unpacking that for a small business owner felt like this huge wedge where we could really bring a bunch of inventory onto the market, which was different than real estate, right? There's an MLS and there's all this kind of stuff. But here in New York City, there's a company called StreetEasy, which Zillow owns or acquired. And New York City and the Hamptons are the only two places in America that don't have an MLS. StreetEasy has become the de facto MLS because all the inventory is there. And again, this was this ability to pattern match and say, well, if we can do what StreetEasy did in the small business space, we become the MLS, we become the place that small business owners go to figure out what their business is worth and the place to go sell. And, by definition, then buyers show up, because if you have good, there's good stuff in the market, the buyers know where to go.
Yeah. It's a super interesting idea. And it's one that's like, I don't know. When I first think about it, my gut reaction is like, well, a marketplace for homes, it makes sense because it's a house. It's simple. You know what it's worth. Businesses are complicated. There's different industries, da da da. But then when I kind of reflect on it a little bit more, it's like, well, no, actually, houses are very different, and they can be made of different components. And some of them have a pool, and some of them have an extra building on the property. As long as you just understand the value of all the different variables, then you can price everything fairly. And so now I'm wondering why there isn't a a marketplace that exists for small businesses, actually, because somebody should have just figured out what are all the variables, what are they worth, let's price every business the same way so that it's fair.
Yeah, no, and I think we talk a lot internally that hopefully every single person in America in 10 years, when they hear about the idea, they're like, oh, you mean that didn't exist before you guys? And you're like, no. So it's kind of like Uber, right? Or Airbnb or even Zillow, because you'll hear people be like, well, but everyone knows what their home's worth. And, you're like, well, that's because Zillow did that. Otherwise, you had to go talk to the broker. They would go look in the MLS that only they had access to, and then they would drive you to the various home, So like 15 years ago, the real estate landscape looked a lot different. You think about even, car shopping, sort of similar, where you would walk in, you kind of wouldn't know, like there would have like the list price, but then you talk to the general manager, and like now the prices are online. You can look at all the stuff. So then it's changed what a car dealership is where you basically test drive, you see what's on the lot, you try to negotiate a deal, but the price discovery has been done. And that's kind of the similar thing. Like if you can do that, it really unlocks and changes the paradigm. And I think the difference is people were buying cars irregardless in a way. But here, a lot of small business owners either shut their business down because they don't realize that it's worth more than it is. They sell for a lot less because it's a thinly traded market. they get a worse deal because they're just not getting exposed to 200 buyers or thousands of buyers like on our marketplace. Again, right? If there are enough eyeballs, a home's gonna, any home that lists on Zillow will get enough eyeballs that the homeowner knows they're getting a fair shake, and that's kind of what we want to do at Baton.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And if you've got two possible states of the world where one of them is there is information asymmetry, as you said, where the buyer knows something, the seller knows something different, and they have to kind of negotiate and get to a price. It's like competitive or shrewd people, I guess, will end up winning in that world. They'll sell their business for more than it's worth, or they'll buy a business for less than it's worth. But the person on the other end of that is getting screwed. And so having the transparency and the marketplace and the rules that everybody agrees on, you would think that it's obviously more fair, and you would also think that it probably would increase the volume of transactions being done,
Yeah.
which is an interesting byproduct of that.
Yeah. Like you think about Wall Street, very high transparency, but there's think of the amount of trades that happen. Obviously stocks is one thing, but corporate bonds or something that's a little more nuanced, trillions of dollars of those things are trading hands. And the point is, if you can get people to the table because the asset is roughly $1.5 million. Maybe the owner thinks they should get 1.6, and maybe the buyer wants to get it for 1.4. That's a lot different than what happens right now, where the owner thinks it's worth 3 million. The buyer
Right.
comes in and is trying to finagle the $890,000 sale. So then they don't even start the process, or they're go away. And we're trying to get people to the table, because at the end of the day, that first situation means 0 transactions happen. Whereas in my first situation, maybe it's 50% chance that it happens in and around between 1.4 and 1.6 or whatever the case is. And kind of to your point, different people find different value in the same asset. So someone that's retiring and wants to, I think the other interesting component is the complexity of deals that you can do in the small business world makes it a lot more interesting, because there's seller financing, there's earnouts, there's minority ownership. There's an ability to get paid multiple times in multiple different ways, which you can't really do on a house, right? The house is the one-time transaction, and it's like a down payment and a mortgage, which are very regulated. Whereas here, there's a way to, the owner really wants the 1.6, the buyer could say, okay, fine, I'm going to give you $1 million in cash, and then $600,000 or $400K in a seller note, where I don't have to pay you interest for 2 years. And then there's a, if we hit all the goals, a $200K, earnout in 4 years. So it's still a $1.6 million deal, but it's working for both sides, and it also accomplishes what the buyer needs, which is a lower kind of entry price, and lets them get their feet wet, right? And so that's the fun part of our business, is you can actually kind of, it's like the M&A investment banking part, where you can actually thread the needle and get what both sides want. And it's not just about the top line. This has to be 1.5 or I walk or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, because the corollary with a house would be, you want $1 million for your house. I'll pay you 800,000 cash, and then another 100,000 if we use the pool as much as we think we're going to use it, and
Right.
another 100,000 if the plumbing doesn't have any issues for the first 5 years. It's that is really interesting.
Right. And the nice part of a business that's a going concern versus a house is, this is kind of maybe to continue the analogy, it's if the house had an in-law suite where there's someone renting that in-law suite, then you can actually have, you're okay, I'll pay you 800K, but I'll also pay you 100K if that renter stays in the property and doesn't turn
Mhm.
over for a year, and then I'll pay you another 100K if he stays for another, so then there's
Yeah.
actually this, because there is cash that's flowing out of the business, which allows the buyer to have flexibility on this, and in some ways the seller the flexibility to keep earning without being the owner slash key person slash all the other stuff, because then they can sit on a beach and get paid, and it might just be over time, but they have like a nest egg, again, to use the example, right, the $1 million, but then they have this seller note that's paying them better than if they put it in T-bills or they put it somewhere else. So I think that's the fun part, where you can actually, we've done this a bunch of times. We've sold businesses that are negative cash flow. We've sold small businesses with no financing, just full cash. We've sold ones that have all these components, and it's generally that what the buyer wants and what the seller needs are the two sides, and those you can match those two, and it's not only just like the cash offer.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this other statistic. I forget what the exact number is, but it's something like 75%, could be more than that, of sellers, when they sell their business, regret. They're filled with regret afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the main reason for that is they feel like they didn't get as much as it's worth.
Yep.
And so this, marketplace where it's very clear what the pricing is, what the value is, I should say, this also solves that problem, which is kind of a big problem. You got all these business owners who, work their tail off their whole life, and then they're filled with regret once they sell
Yep.
their baby. It's like, yeah, solving that
Yeah.
would be huge for just psychology.
Yeah. Because and it's just the fear of the unknown, right? You don't really know. There is no Zestimate on your business, and or a way for you to go look at, actually, here, I own a pizza restaurant, and here are the other 3 pizza restaurants in the last 2 years in Lexington, Kentucky, that have sold, and they've sold for 3 times cash flow, let's call it. And so, like, you got 2.8 or you got 3.1 cash flow. So, like, you're in the ballpark. You should feel good about the sale.
Yeah.
And that's literally data that we give to every owner, whether they list on the platform or not, because of the comps that we have. So it gives people confidence that, that we are pricing them fairly, because we're a neutral third party, right? Like, we're trying to make a market. We're like a market maker. So we're not going to give them a price that's so high that no buyer is going to ever bite on that price, nor are we going to price them so low that we feel like they're getting taken advantage of. We're kind of incentivized to get a price that's fair for both sides, and then they can negotiate on the details, right? But at least we're, again, bringing them to the table to sit across from each other and finalize the last terms, and we're there to help support them along that final piece.
Yeah. Have you figured out the Baton version of Zestimate? Do you have a word for that yet?
No, I mean, I want to call it the Bestimate, which I actually think is a great one, but we clearly get sued if we did that. So we've just been calling it the Baton estimate for ones that we have publicly available data on. So again, random Joe's Pizzeria in Lexington, Kentucky. What is our Baton estimate for that? If Joe then connected their financials and went through our process, Joe would have a private, only viewable to him, Baton valuation, which is based on his P&L, balance sheet, and everything. So, like, we don't share that externally. It's really just to empower that owner to realize that, okay, my pizza restaurant's worth $1 million. I want to list it and sell it. So that's the delineation we make in terminology.
Okay. You mentioned, buyers and sellers. Obviously, that's the two sides of the marketplace. Looking at your LinkedIn, these past roles you've had, a lot of it has been in sales, going to market, ramping up businesses. So creating a marketplace, you need buyers, you need sellers. Are you focusing on one side of the marketplace over the other and trying to grow that?
Yeah. Almost 100%, I'd say 98% focused on the supply side, so owners, because what we found is buyers are, hunting, spending I mean, you probably saw it as you were doing the search fund, right? Like finding good quality leads and or just actual opportunities was super hard. And so that's where we're focused, because the more listings we bring onto the platform, there are hundreds of buyers that are engaging with each listing on our platform because they see it. There's always 100, 200 people that'll be interested. And so that's not the hard side of the network. Over time,
Okay.
bringing more and more buyers on obviously helps attract more owners. So that's the sort of marketplace dynamics, but the quote unquote cold start problem, where do you start initially? We're really focused. We have been for the last two and a half years on the owner side.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I didn't realize the the buyer side would be so easy to fill. That's interesting. Um, so for the owner side, the seller side, what are there like some common challenges that you have in working with those people, misconceptions they may have, something like that, or has that been relatively easy as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think people, we sort of come in with the expectation that whether it's you call it a misconception or a lack of understanding of their valuation on the call or when they get the valuation report, that's part of it, just to make sure we didn't miss anything, make sure we're representing their business correctly and they understand how we got to the number. That's not really been an issue, honestly.
Hmm.
People get, because they see the data. Sometimes they're like, this is too low for me. I need to go grow the business and come back. And we're like, great, you should do that. We're here for you when you're ready. I think outside of that, when people are in the sale process, we we've started stressing this a lot more, of the expectations of the owner, that they have to reply to buyer questions. They have to kind of,
Hmm.
they're the fount of knowledge as much as we're an amazing advisor or we've pulled together an amazing listing with a bunch of data. All the fine grained points are, I use the analogy of Airbnb hosts and guests. Someone's going to ask the question of like, hey, do you take pets, or are you close to this park? That's something Airbnb, isn't going to know unless the host puts it in their listing or the host actually answers it. And we're starting to set that expectation that the sale of your business is dependent on you replying to people that are interested in selling, which sounds kind of self-evident when you say it out loud, but setting that expectation up front, I think, has been game changing for us to have owners aligned that, this isn't just I've put it on Baton and then I'm magically gonna, sell it without being all that involved. We want to make sure that it's not a tremendous amount of overhead, but when a buyer has a question, they want to hear an answer pretty quick.
Yeah. So that's interesting because, I guess the what people currently do is they talk to a business broker, and the business broker does some discovery with the client or with the seller.
Mm-hmm.
They try to understand their business, and then the business broker would be the one fielding a lot of the buyer questions.
Yep.
So this is a little bit of a different setup. Is that right?
Yeah, it's still happening on our platform. So again,
Hmm.
I mean, Airbnb, because most people know how that works. Like
Yeah.
go into Airbnb and ask the question, and then it comes back in Airbnb. It's not like I have your email address all of a sudden, and you and I are emailing about the lock and lock code or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it's still happening on the platform. So that's how we're handling it, so that we can ensure that you know there's not conversations that we think are detrimental to the sale,
Hmm.
or just that if there's a buyer that's being rude, or like people know that, and on both sides. So, but outside of that, yeah, we do think that speed and transparency, and buyers and sellers kind of want this, right? They just want to speed this process up. And many times a business broker, especially if that business broker, the asking the question and then it takes days to get a response, and then it's like days to get the next question, it's just slowing a lot of stuff down.
Yeah.
Admittedly, that's how we started, right? And we still handle some of the deals that way, but we're really moving towards this messaging platform where everything happens on because, and then the goal being that questions and answers that have been asked and answered can actually go on the listing, right? If someone asks, I don't know, what's the price of what's your wholesale price of coffee or something like that, which we think another buyer is going to want to know and isn't, confidential or any of that kind of stuff. We can put it on the listing and it's there and available for Sally when she shows up. She actually already sees that that's been answered. Or why did the revenue go down in this one revenue line in Q4 of 2023? The owner can say, yeah, I was dealing with some health issues, so that's why that happened. And then someone knows, and they don't have 5 people that are asking them the exact same question about the finances, which to your example, would be the business broker doing it or the business broker getting that question and then being the one that answers it, which isn't a horrible thing, but we feel like there's a lot of well-formed product features that people are pretty used to that and comfortable with, right? Like 7 million or maybe more at this point, right? Airbnb hosts that are comfortable just messaging on the platform. It's kind of the same thing. Owners are very comfortable messaging because they do it with their customers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Is and a business broker usually also charges, whatever 7 to 12% of the sale price, depending on the business size and the broker and whatever.
Yeah.
What is the fee to use Baton Market?
Yeah, so it's $1,000 a month for the first 6 months to list and get everything running, and essentially a retainer. And then it's 6%, which is the fee. And then all of your retainers. So let's say if you sold in the 6th month or the 7th month and you've paid the $6K, it's $1 million business that sells. Your fee is $54K, not the $60K, because you've already paid the $6K. But pretty simple. And yeah, to your point, much cheaper than a broker. And with the retainer, we're doing outbound marketing to strategics, getting all those buyers, the buyers that are already on our platform, but also net new buyers that might be interested in this specific business, be they competitors or larger strategics in other geos that are looking to get into that market, right? Like, to continue my analogy, the large pizza chain that wants to get into Lexington, Kentucky or something, we will reach out to them and see if they're interested.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the reasons that people use a broker is to kind of protect them from the negotiation in a way. Mm-hmm. But as we talked about previously, there's not as much of a negotiation here. So you kind of remove that protection need. And with it, the need for a broker, really.
Yeah, I mean, we still do a ton of advising. We see the LOIs as they come through, and in that case, think about it. This is a strong deal. This is kind of a low LOI, low offer. So we're still providing that advisory, but really where the rubber meets the road, if you will, right? Like right when that owner is getting 1 or 2 or 3 offers, we're there to help advise him or her on how to think about that offer. Again, what's the component of seller financing versus cash, all those things, because they have not done this before. So that's really where we think the value is. We do think it's less in the, do we have to be the go-between on the questions and answers? No. Do we think it's important that the buyers and sellers aren't negotiating price necessarily? Yes, because even if you think about it in real estate, if 2 people were doing it directly, someone lowballs someone, they get annoyed. Like, I'm never working with this person. Whereas if we're in the middle, all of a sudden we can kind of be like, okay, we'll take it to the person, we'll see, and we can kind of couch it being like, hey, this is a low offer, but like, what do you want to go back with? And
Yeah.
again, we're providing that assistance to get them back to where they're not issuing expletives and walking away from someone that you could probably, you can probably again get them to the table and make the deal happen.
Yeah. I everything I ever purchase, I lowball right away. That's
Right.
that's how you make the offer. Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, if they say yes right away, you're like, wait, what just happened? I should have asked
Exactly.
for, I should have been lower, or, for salary or something, right? At a company, if they say yes right away, you're like, should have asked for
Yep.
more. So it's that whole thing of you expect there to be negotiations and you kind of want there to be negotiations, but we've built the platform where, we can store all the letters of intent, we can compare them, we can do, we can offer up that expertise, because we're seeing hundreds of LOIs, right? Where even most business brokers aren't seeing that, but because we're seeing it across the marketplace, we can actually, similar to sales comps, I almost use it as a proxy. We see a ton of sales comps, so we can be the expert in the market on what your company is valued at. But we similarly see a ton of letters of intent and asset purchase agreements at a scale that most people don't. And so we can actually say, this is a pretty strong offer given the other 100 LOIs that we've seen in the last few months. 70% on their SBA loan, 20% for the seller financing, and a 10% down feels kind of like standard, right? And that's news and helpful to the owner. But also, if someone came in and was like, I want 60% seller financing for a good deal, we'd say, look, admittedly, you're not going to win the deal at this. I would, say that maybe you can start at 30 and then we come to 20, but we're not going to, the owner is not going to get out of bed for this. And we have the data to know that what we expect this owner to accept is going to be in a ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, I want to wrap up. I guess I'll just kind of float out an interest. I just have other thoughts. We've got baby boomer mass retirement wave. We've got interest rates went way up last year. Like, just from a industry trend, how do you kind of see the space going forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a ton of macro, tailwinds where baby boomers between COVID and then, or whatever it is, vibes recession or recession, who knows, are holding on to their businesses, but unclear of what's next. And whatever stat it is, right? 10,000 baby boomers are shutting down or want to close their businesses every single day. And so with that, the ability to, let's get 1% of that, let's get 10%, like easily. If we're doing that, there's millions of businesses that trade hands every year that are sellable, have employees, all that kind of stuff. And the other piece to your interest rates question, compared to real estate, where mortgages went from 2 and change to 7 and change, the delta was a lot, and it actually kind of killed the market. And people are sitting on 30-year fixed 2.6% mortgages. We haven't seen as much of that in the SBA loan arena, because loans went from 6% to 7 or 8%. Like, they've gone up, but again, they weren't at 2. They weren't at essentially a little bit over prime. There was still a reasonable interest rate. So the change, maybe some of the marginal stuff has changed, but again, as we talked about, there's a lot of levers you can pull in small business transactions. So we've kind of seen it go from 80% loan or SBA loan, 10% seller financing, 10% down, to kind of 70, 20, 10. So some of that money has shifted to seller financing, so they don't need to put as much, the buyers don't need to put as much on the SBA loan at 8 or 9%. but then they're giving, a 7%, seller finance note to the owner, which is still better than the 5% that they could get in T-bills or whatever it is, right? So we haven't seen it. Maybe we're missing something, but we haven't seen a huge impact. Certainly on the margins, I think it's made some deals, different, but generally it's impacted structure, not the velocity of interest or the velocity of deals, which is great for us. I think we can get all those deals across the line, just in slightly different ways.
Got it. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. This has been super educational, honestly.
Thank you.
And I hope I'm sitting here today talking to the CEO of the Zillow of the small business space. So I'm super pumped to I'm pumped to chart your progress, over the next years. And otherwise, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. This was great.